Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this latest Q&A session for the tennis parents community. If you're not a member of the community on Facebook, please do go on Facebook and search for us, and you'll find us. And just with a process of some easy joining questions, you'll be able to join the community, which has been set up as a place for parents to get together, parents of tennis players training in the GB system, and to share ideas and to share their experiences and to decide for themselves how best they can support their children in tennis. So welcome to everyone tonight. I'm really delighted that tonight we're going to be finding out all about the LTA National Performance Pathway from the team at the LTA, who are tasked with designing and delivering it. These people are the people who decide on the mechanism for selecting which junior players in Britain have the potential to be successful professional players. And then they distribute the funding, deliver the experiences, or create the environments to help them to flourish. I know it's a topic that you're all super keen to learn more about. And so I'm delighted that we've got not one, not two, but three experts with us tonight. And these guys are giving up their evening for our benefit. And we're not obviously paying. We always say that. We wouldn't expect to pay someone from the LTA, but we're not paying our guests tonight, obviously. So thank you for that. Helen Reesby heads up the team. Her career at the LTA spans over 14 years. And she's a level 5 coach, as well as a coach tutor. She's got a degree in sports science from Loughborough University, where she was also director of tennis for over 5 years. Welcome, Helen.
Thank you very much, Kay. Thanks for having me.
No problem. And I've also got on the screen here two of Helen's team, Andy Barnes and Dave Kirby. Guys, if you'd like to unmute yourselves, perhaps you could just tell us a little bit about what you do and your background. Andy, would you like to go first?
Yeah, brilliant. Good evening, everybody. Unfortunately, I get to follow Helen. That was a very nice intro for Helen there. I currently work for the LTA and I kind of oversee the Regional Player Development Network. I've been at the LTA for over 16 years now, primarily in a kind of national coach role, where I've been fortunate enough to kind of travel the world with some of our kind of best young players, some of which are now kind of household name pros. So I feel very fortunate and looking forward to chatting to you guys this evening.
That's really interesting. Are you going to tell us which pros particularly?
Yeah, so I've had the privilege of traveling with kind of Jack Draper, Emma Raducanu, and then some of the juniors that you'll now know that are starting to transition, the kind of Mimi Zhu, Hannah Klugman. I've been fortunate enough to kind of travel around Europe. It sounds really glamorous traveling with kind of 10, 11, 12-year-olds, but I promise you it's not as glamorous as it sounds.
No, and I can imagine also that it must be really nice to watch these guys coming on through the process and then getting into the success that Hannah particularly recently has had. Amazing.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, Dave, tell us about what you do for the LTA.
Good question. So 10 and under national pathway manager, 1 year behind Andy. So I've done 15 years at the LTA, various different roles, always in the performance team, from a county, regional, national perspective, and currently, like you say, working with Hell's team, but overseeing the 10 and under stage of the player pathway. It's interesting. We were chatting beforehand, Kay, and I was thinking about my journey in tennis and the reason why I'm ultimately here. It's like my mum is completely obsessed by tennis, to the point where I still receive texts every week about how the juniors are doing and the seniors around the world. She actually keeps me up to date with what's going on in British tennis, probably more than I am able to track it myself. But
that's amazing. I mean, I think I need to meet your mum, and you need to meet my son.
Yeah, she's obsessed.
Well, that's great. Now, I think we've got a lot to cover tonight, and I've got lots of questions. As always, the attendees are very shy, and they've asked me to ask their questions for them. We've got one person who may be on the Zoom who may have one question to ask themselves, but you're welcome to join in and contribute on the night if you feel brave enough. There's nothing to be afraid of. Nobody bites here, but you know, we love you to contribute if you'd like to. But we thought the best way to start off was to ask Helen to present and to just give you an overview of the system and the changes that have happened, because I was very out of date from when my children were younger to what the system's like now. So is that okay, Helen? I think you've got a presentation for us.
Yes. Just try and pull this up.
That's certainly working for me. Great.
That come up okay? Yep. Brilliant. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Kay, and for everybody and having us here tonight. I guess what we're going to try and do just with this presentation here is just give you a little bit of an overview, a bit of background and context to what we do, which may answer some of the questions you've got, but will certainly be helpful when we get to the Q&A afterwards. So, before I kind of start with my first slide, I'm just going to talk you through a brief overview of the National Performance Pathway Plan, which I hope is going to be kind of helpful and insightful. But the National Performance Pathway team, of which Andy, Dave and I are all part of, we actually oversee 2 stages of the pathway. So on this infographic you can see here, this is actually the slide that shows the full performance pathway at the LTA. So this has got everything here from, you can see on the far left, the regional performance stage, which is 7 to 10-year-olds, all the way through to the right-hand side, which is our kind of pro players. And the National Performance Pathway team that we are a part of, we actually oversee 2 stages of the pathway. So we oversee the regional performance stage, that's the 7 to 10-year-olds. So Dave leads that and he's supported by a team of national pathway coaches. And we also oversee the national performance stage, which is that kind of 10 to 14, which is led by myself, supported by Andy in the RPDC network lead role, and a group of national coaches on a day-to-day basis. So kind of collectively, we look after both of those stages. So today we're really going to kind of focus in on that 7 to 14 age group, obviously, which is under our guise. So where I'll just start is last year, so 2023, I'm getting my dates right. And when I was, I suppose, fully embedded in this role, I've only been in this role now for a couple of years. We developed what we've called as our National Performance Pathway Plan. And this was to ensure really that we had clarity in what we were trying to achieve from a 14 and under perspective, and also how we were looking to do that. So what I'm going to do today is just talk you through some of those elements, which hopefully will just help give you a little bit of context. So the first thing we did is we wanted to outline a purpose. So what is it we're trying to achieve with players by the time they get to 14? So they're graduating out of the national performance stage of the pathway and they're moving into the international junior stage of the pathway, which for your information is overseen by the men's and women's team. What is it we want to achieve by that point? So I'll just bring it up just so you can read it first, and then I'll just talk through it in a little bit more detail. So what we're trying to do is, by 14, there are 2 elements to this. We are trying to increase the number of internationally relevant players we have by 14. And what we mean by that would be players that are, going to tournaments, really wanting to feature in the latter end of the key international events, the milestone events, as we might call them. But we also want to have an increase in the number of players that are internationally competitive by the time they're 14. So these might be players that are not yet reaching the final rounds of those those milestone events, but they're there, they're competing in them, they're being competitive in the early rounds, and they've got maybe the tools and the potential to transition through just a little bit later, that kind of 14 to 16 age group, which is a trend we definitely see a bit more often, particularly with the boys, with the impact of growth and maturation. So we're trying to kind of, by 14, get more players who are internationally relevant and internationally competitive. The next bit I'll talk you through is our philosophy, because we might have players that are engaged in our activity as early as 7 years old, all the way through to 14 years old, or any point in between. So what's really important for us as a team is we've got an agreed philosophy or shared philosophy in how we're looking to develop and support the players. So again, it's a little bit of a longer sentence. So let me, if you read it first, I'll then delve into a few of the key words. So just picking out a few words to bring this to life then. So resilience. The sport of tennis really does dictate the need to start to developing resilience from a very young age. It's very hard to be a successful international tennis player without having developed a resilience. So from a young age, in the appropriate way, we need to start to develop that. Well-rounded players, that's almost two elements we talk about here. So when a player is moving from the regional to the national stage of the pathway at that 10 years old, as a team, we'll talk a lot about a player having an all-round game style, having a kind of complete tools of which their game style then will start to emerge a little bit more in the next few years. So they've got that kind of well-rounded game. But it also talks to a person-first philosophy. It is a key principle of our performance strategy. We are, yes, trying to develop players, tennis players, but we have a really important role here in how we are developing the person at a really critical stage, age and stage for them. You'll see the words thrive in competition. They're very deliberate words, and I'll come to this in a little bit more detail. But, you know, we really believe that competition is at the heart of player development, and we want to help support players that look forward to and thrive in competition. And then the last two words that I'll talk through are the readiness and robustness. And these are terms we use a lot, actually, when you're starting to move into the men's and women's game. The readiness almost being the psychosocial skills, the life skills, the technical competencies, the tactical nous, whereas the robustness is a little bit more physiological in nature. You know, can they tolerate the volume, the intensity, the match count, which we know increases as you start to move through the pathway. And what's slightly unique, I suppose, about the National Performance Pathway stages is we have a number of transition phases. So there is a transition phase when a player moves from the regional to the national stage of the pathway at 10 years old. There's a transition stage when they move from the national stage of the pathway to the international stage at 14. But you will also see a transition stage at 12, where you'll see many players starting to move from kind of a domestic calendar competitively, starting to maybe move to more of an international calendar. And what comes with that is increased duration of tournaments, travel, a slight increase in the volume, potentially intensity of training too. So we actually have quite a few transition phases in our stages of the pathway that we are trying to really help prepare and support our players through. So the next thing I'll just talk you through briefly are what we've called key pillars. You know, so these key pillars really these are key areas of focus for us that are at the heart of everything we do. So when we're sort of making decisions around, you know, how are we looking to support, which elements are we trying to deliver on, these three themes will always be live in our mind and part of our kind of decision-making process. These are not in any particular order, by the way, so it's not like the first one I show you is more of a priority than a third, not at all. So the first one, competition, forget the words grounded in. You know, from a competition perspective, we really believe, like I said it before, competition should be at the heart of player development. You know, we want to develop players that thrive in and learn through competition. So, you know, they'll be practicing during the week and looking forward to maybe at the weekend playing their matches. And they use those matches as a learning opportunity to then kind of be chomping at the bit to go back on the practice court again and go, right, how can I get that better? But I want to get better to kind of put it back on the match court again. We also have a big role to play in inspiring and preparing our players to be ready to perform at those key milestone events that I alluded to earlier, and ensure that they have the robustness and the readiness to tolerate the competitive demands, which we know increase as they start to move through the stages of the pathway. The second bit is daily training environments. I mean, this really is mission critical. Now, you could have a player who has a brilliant competition schedule, really great added value, which I'll come to in a minute. But the day-to-day training environment really is the core of their program. Now, it's vital that they have a committed coach who knows and who can drive the standards and has the knowledge and skill to kind of optimize player development and create the environment that is conducive and required to help them meet the demands of the next stage of the pathway. And depending upon what age and stage you are, they might look different. You know, for a 14-year-old, that might be athletic development, S&C, it's sparring partners. At 10-year-olds, that might be something slightly different. But this is one of the reasons we actually place a really big emphasis on our support for our 10 and under performance program network and our RPDC network. And the last one then, before I kind of hand over to Dave and Andy, is LTA value add. So as the LTA, there are kind of elements that we support. So some examples would be coach development, 10 and under performance program network, the RPDC network, just to name a few. But there's also elements that we deliver. And we now have a very carefully considered and pulled together calendar of activities, which the aim is to add value to hopefully what already is a very good day-to-day environment and competition kind of competition schedule. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pass across to Dave first, Dave's going to talk through the regional stage of the pathway, and then Andy will talk through the national stage, the areas that we deliver and the areas that we support.
Thanks, Els. I anticipated there'd be a varying level of understanding on the call regarding the 10 and under pathway, so I thought I'd start with a little bit of information on the team. Els alluded to it. There are 5 national pathway coaches. Shane Deacon, Mark Hayden, John Traherne, Eve Hughes, Tim Pyatt, each of them overseeing one of the English regions. All highly experienced coaches, highly credible in their own right, and they've probably spent more years than they care to remember immersed in player development across the pathway. Probably worth noting at this point that whilst the national coaches oversee one of the English regions, we do have formal links with both Tennis Wales and Tennis Scotland. We have relationships with both in the same way we have relationships with the counties, and that's to ensure that the relevant players are nominated and considered for the most appropriate activity. So that's the team. And like Hal says, I might just start, if you look over to the right on the slide, there's a little bit of the where we support. So I'll just talk about those two very briefly. So players and their teams, and I'm sure you can all appreciate at the 10 and under stage, at this age and stage, we really try to take quite a broad approach to supporting players, mainly through our regional performance camp program, which is delivered throughout the year. There's approximately 500 players across the country that are involved in that regional camp program. Of course, we may follow up more specifically with the coaches of some of the players, very much with the aim to try and influence the acceleration of their development. So that's players and their teams. There's also the 10 under performance program network, and that's the day-to-day. You know, that's the day in, day out where players are being developed. We've currently got about 64 across England and Wales, and it's basically an LTA kite mark, which recognises the quality of a whole program, just their 10 and under aspect of it. Typically, that's where they might have a track record coach that's consistently developed players that move through the player pathway. So typically they have a decent player base, and you'll often see a national pathway coach in attendance there because of that. And as part of our support, we look to provide them with multiple coach development opportunities. So now on to a bit of an overview of the activity and experiences that we deliver. And it's quite comprehensive, you'll see there on the left, but you know, this has evolved over time. I think regardless of the activity I touch upon, I think there's multiple benefits though. Clearly always having benchmarks for a player to aspire towards. Then when players are involved, you know, having a great experience, which is in addition to their day-to-day program, make new friends, train with other promising young players, which hopefully only fuels their motivation and love for the game. It allows us to connect with parents, which is ironically what we're doing here, to help educate and inform wherever needed. But also allows the team to have that oversight of how players are developing and share feedback with coaches. So regardless of the activity, I think there's multiple benefits. I'll talk primarily now about the regional performance camps, because that's been something that's been a core part of what we deliver for the past 3 years. And these are day-long camps, again, which are delivered across the 5 English regions. In each region, we deliver 3 camps a year per gender and age group. So that's at 8 and under, 9 and under, and 10 and under. Players are invited to a camp by the national coach for the region. but that's very much in consultation with the lead county performance coaches who may nominate players for consideration. And that's where our links to Tennis Wales and Tennis Scotland come in, where players are linked into the appropriate region's activity. And players are very much invited based on a perception of where they're currently at with their tennis and what their potential is looking like to move through to the next stage of the pathway. Invitations are based on considerations to a player's attitude in both training and competition, their athletic qualities, overall competitive spirit, a bit of their competitive profile, and also their technical skills. So it's a real broad look at the player given the age and stage. So those are the regional performance camps. Over the last 18 months, though, the activity has evolved, and we've introduced additional activity at that 10 and under age group, and that's been the primary purpose of that is to help better prepare players with the appropriate opportunities and experiences which help them transition into the national stage of the pathway. So the additional activity in that 10 and under year now includes interregional match play weekends or days, interregional camps, national camps for the girls only, and trips and experiences. So I might move on to the next slide just because it gives a bit of a feel for what the calendar looks like as a whole. You can see it's kind of blocked into 3 rotations, always starting with, you can see in October, the first regional performance camp, and it runs through to January, sort of finishing with a GB friendly in Belgium. That's sort of a rotation 1. You can then probably see we repeat the same activity again for a second rotation, and the third one looks slightly different. But I'll just give you a little bit more info around what that activity looks like. So the interregional match plays are either a 1 or a 2-day event. And again, Hels was mentioning at the start about the importance of competition and learning and developing through competition. And that's what that is completely all about. It's a competitive environment, but with a bit of a twist. And it's where we don't record the scores. So scores, for the matches aren't recorded. A lot of interaction with the national coaches, with the messaging being very much around how can you learn and develop for your future self. It's difficult for a young mind at times to put the outcome of a match to one side, and the concept of at times you have to accept losing to actually win longer term. It's a tough concept, but it's certainly one we try to push in that environment. And how can you leave that day or 2-day event actually being a little bit of a better tennis player, even if the results don't always go your way? We've obviously then got the interregional camp, which is again a similar vibe to a regional performance camp. Maybe the level of challenge, volume, intensity of the camp being a little bit higher, given maybe the players at that day are able to cope with that a little bit more. I think it's really worth pointing out at this point how with each of those 3 rotations that are on the screen, they are quite progressive. So if you look at the interregional camp in December, that's a 1-day camp, very similar to a regional camp. But the second interregional camp a player comes to is 2 days, but where we contribute to the players staying overnight. The final one would be a 2-day camp again, but this time it would be where the players are away from parents and where we would look after the children in the evening. So it's progressive in its experience. National camp, you'll see in there, but that's actually just for the girls at present. That was a conscious decision. It has often felt, and Andy and I have worked at the organisation 15, 16 years, and to be fair, Hels has pretty much done the same, but a bit more in and out. You often get that with the girls where it's a little bit clearer, even at the earlier age group. So there was certainly a level of comfort to be able to deliver an activity like a national camp for a smaller number of players. With the boys, we certainly felt less comfortable. It's much tougher with the boys. So what we do is we replicate the same experience so the boys don't miss out. But we deliver that under the banner of an interregional camp. There's also you'll see on there the friendlies and trips. Again, progressive. So the first one you'll look at in January, and that's a GB friendly. It's a 3-day event. Again, it's overnight with the team, but it's on against the Belgians on green ball. The second friendly is in May, Again, it's still in this country where the French players come over to us, but this time on yellow ball. And the final experience is a trip over where we go to France. We take some of the players to one of the French national events to play out on the clay and give them that first taste of actually going overseas, which is an important milestone for players on their journey. I think that covers everything I wanted to cover. The only bit which might be of interest, I think, was maybe around just the invitations. I just wanted to stress, because I think it's really important. All of that activity that we deliver is all considered in isolation. If you attend, if you're invited to and I use the word invited really carefully. Like, it's not selected. You're not selected to be part of a squad or part of a program. They're invited to independent days and experiences, and everything is made on merit at a moment in time where we go through a similar process to ensure that players have a fair and equal opportunity to get those experiences that we have available. I just thought I'd throw that out there because I think that's important, but that I think is everything from a 10 and under perspective. Over to you, Andy.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Helen. And yeah, I'll just talk you through the national performance stage, which is kind of 10 to 14. And as you can imagine, that age range is quite diverse. So what a player needs at 11 is very different to 14. So I'll try and give you a brief overview of what that looks like. Whereas Dave's team is organised regionally, so you have national coaches deployed within a region, we have 5 national coaches working in the kind of 10 to 14 space that are deployed nationally. So we have 5 national coaches that are Holly Bambridge, Kate Warren-Holland, Luke Milligan, Chris Wilkinson and Richard Plews, and they are divided into boys and girls teams, and they have specialisms. So they work Holly works with the 10s and 11s girls, Luke with the 12s girls, Kate with the 14s girls, and then Chris and Richard work together in the 14s boys. It's important to say they are as credible with boys and girls. And I think we have a really good mix in the team of former players that have played at the very highest level and development coaches, people that have coached from club level through to county level through to international level. It makes for very lively selection meetings because everybody has a different opinion. But actually, I think we have the most rounded approach that we've ever had by having these different personalities. So what I'll briefly do is I'll just talk you through the same way Dave did, what we support and what we deliver. So exactly the same as the 10 and under guys, we support players and their teams. And what's a really important point here is that is independent of where you train. So you can train anywhere in the country, coached by anybody. If you are showing potential, any of our national coaches can support a player. Now, that could be within their own environment. That might be a conversation at a tournament. That might be just general support remotely, which might be some kind of technical advice or advice on the road. But actually, we support players and we support their teams. The next thing we support is regional player development centres. And this is my world. This is my job. We have 14 of them around the country. They are there to provide fantastic environments for players to then transition into the next stage. So they have track record head coaches. They offer indoor and outdoor training. They offer athletic development with an S&C coach. They provide sparring. They travel consistently to tournaments. They are there to provide what a player needs to transition to the next stage. And we invest in those financially because we believe in investing in environments is the best thing for us to do to provide everything that a player needs to transition to the next stage. And we're conscious of what we're up against. Is there are international academies around the world. And what we want to do is we have kind of a high bar and a high aspirations for the regional player development centres to be comparable, if not better, rather than just being local. So we actually have really high ambitions for the regional player development centres. And then like the 10 and under guys, their experiences we deliver. And exactly the same way, these are all independent selections. So every single one of these areas here is a separate selection, which makes a lot of admin and selection meetings for us, but actually makes the program as open and inclusive as it has ever been. So every single one of these activities, players are selected on their merit and they are completely open. I'll talk you through briefly. They start with match play weekends where we invite around kind of 16 to 24 players. that get the opportunity to come and compete, learn through matches with our national coaches there to observe and support. So that means we kind of keep that group open, and we do that at most ages. So we do that all the way through from 11 through to 14. So even the 14-year-olds get that opportunity to be seen. We then host some GB friendly matches, which are a really good introductory kind of activity into international tournaments. We play against the French, we play against the Belgians. They get to put on their GB shirt. You can see a very young Mimi Zhu and Hannah Klugman, Ben Guzik-Wan on there, getting their first experience playing a competitive match. We then host national and international training camps, and they look slightly different depending on the age. So for 11-year-olds, that could be 3 days in Nottingham. By the time the players are 14, that could be a 5-day camp in the south of France on the red clay, because that's more age and stage relevant. We take players to tournament trips, and we take them to some of the best tournaments in the world. And where we can, we prioritise playing outdoors and on red clay, because a lot of our players play indoor on fast indoor courts. Actually, what we want to do is take them abroad and experience playing on the clay. At 12 and under and 14 and under, you get your first Great Britain representation. So we have winter and summer competitions where you get to compete as a team and get to represent Great Britain for the first time and have that kind of put your shirt on your back and experience what that feels like. And then the final one, which sounds the most glamorous, and to be honest, it is there is an event called the Orange Bowl, which you may have heard of, which is kind of the unofficial outdoor world championships, which takes place in Miami. And where we have strong cohorts of players, we consider running a trip to Miami. And what we might do is we would team up with the USTA, we'd run a training camp at their 100-court National Tennis Centre. We'd then drive down to Miami and try and take on some of the best players in the world. So a friend of mine the other day explained it as, your pathway is Kirby to Miami, because some of these match play weekends take place in Kirby that some of you guys will have been to. And by the end of your journey in the pathway, could well finish with a drive down to Miami. Hells, that's everything from me.
Brill, thank you very much. So, I mean, Kay, I guess I'll come across to you in a minute and I'll stop sharing, but hopefully what that's just given is everyone a little bit of a background to what we do, what we deliver and what we support, and leads into some good conversations.
No, thank you very much. That was a fascinating, if not sort of whistle-stop tour. I'm not sure about the Kirby to Miami as a sort of favourite holiday, but I can, yeah, we'll get T-shirts printed, you know. But no, great stuff, guys, and thank you very much for explaining that. Now, I've got lots of questions that have been sent to us. As I say, the parents are often shy, and some of those might have already been covered by the presentation. But, you know, I always find personally it's good to say things twice, sometimes in a different way. So if we perhaps start, I'll start the ball rolling with some questions that the parents have submitted. And, you know, do feel free to repeat yourselves if you feel it needs reinforcing. And the first one is to do with assessing a junior player's ability. Now, I remember you said that was kind of started off at county level, and all counties, I believe, have a different idea on how they select their county teams, but one would hope that there is some consistency in how they would select children to train within the county structure at least. But the question really is, how do you assess a junior player's ability, both current and potential, at each stage of their development, and who does this?
Dave, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'm
off
happy,
with
I'm happy
10
to
under?
jump in. Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends. There's a few, it depends, isn't there? I'm not going to sit on the fence with a lot of the questions, but I think that phrase is often important, because depending on age and stage, you know, I think there's often a misconception that the competitive profile of a player is the most paramount thing. And yes, it does become more important as a player gets older, but certainly in the world in which I operate, 10 and under, is winning an important skill? Of course it is. Is it something that predetermines whether or not a player is going to do well later on in life? Absolutely not. I think one of the benefits that we have with the structure and our way of working is when we're making some decisions around which players we want to invite to different activity, it's never a one person's opinion. And I think that's actually something which is really different. And like I said, I've been at the LTA for 15 years. We do have that multiple eyes, multiple times approach, which I think is really critical. Certainly at the youngest age groups where, you can see a player's performance in training or competition, and it can be like night and day from one day to the next. I mentioned that we've got a very credible team that have been immersed in player development, are highly skilled and highly experienced in this world. And being able for them to all bring their experience and opinions on where they feel a player might be at, I think is a really important part of what we do right now, versus a one-off, there's a day, player comes in, we'll make a decision in that moment. It's more built up, the picture is built up over a period of time. And the other thing,
you're presumably only looking at the pool of children who've been selected by their county as a first sort of triage, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, certainly at the earliest age groups, we rely and work closely with the counties to nominate players that they feel have potential and are showing good promise. But it's not always in isolation to the county, because the national coaches are out and about. We're at all sorts of different levels of competition. We're at programs, conversations with other key coaches across the coaching community. So there's always ways in which players sort of identify themselves. So it's largely to do with the counties, and I think they'll have an ever increasing role over time. But there are certainly other ways in which players can kind of make themselves known, so to speak.
And is that the same for girls and boys? And is it the same for, say, Scotland and Wales as well as England?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, not too dissimilar with girls and boys. The Scotland Wales one, I mean, I thought it was important to put that on there, because at times, Tennis Scotland, Tennis Wales, are set up slightly differently, and they may operate and deliver some of their own activity and pathways, but we do have that connection with them, because I think that's really important, because ultimately our role is GB. It's not England and Wales, it's GB, and having that connection with the relevant people in those organizations where they can feed information into us, connect players into our activities so that they're represented when we're making decisions on players to be invited to different activity.
And so how would that work if a child wasn't born in GB? I mean, I realise there's mechanisms to transfer, but do you particularly look for children that you think will play for GB?
It's difficult, isn't it? Because there will be many children right now at the age of 6, 7, 8 that have spent their lifetime in England, Scotland, Wales, but might not actually have a British passport yet. So it's too early on in our opinion to start making decisions around which residency they might have, because that's the decision that comes a little bit further along the line, in my opinion, for sure.
Now, and I'd imagine that being part of a Grand Slam nation is always a bit of a bonus when it comes to wildcards and so forth. So I guess it is quite a draw to be a GB player.
It certainly can help.
No comment. No comments on that one. Fair enough.
Hey, just on that one, I think we're just talking through, because Dave very much talking about the 10 and under there, and I think a huge amount of what Dave said applies to the 11 to 14 as well. But I guess as you start to progress through the age groups, we do start to also put greater emphasis on other areas. So I think just from an 11 to 14 perspective, exactly as Dave said, competitive profile is interesting, but is not the decisive factor. That kind of future potential is still the lens that we really, really try and look through. But we do have kind of some key criteria that we look at when we're making kind of invitations at the slightly older age groups. We look at their game style. Have they got an emerging game style? We look at their strengths and their weaknesses. We look at their head, their heart, the athlete, the performance. So that is the competitive bit. We also consider readiness as well, because depending upon what we're selecting them for, are they actually ready to take on that and maximize the benefit of that opportunity? So we look at it, really carefully as a team through all those different areas when we're trying to consider what does future potential look like. And a big part of it will be game development. So with those areas there, they'll all have we would call it an IDP, an individual development plan. Others might call that goals. But what we want to see is players developing and improving against their goals and improving against their IDP, because fundamentally, if they are improving against their IDP, their performances will start to take care of themselves. But certainly from 11 to 14, it becomes a little bit easier as you start to get a little bit older, even when you get older again out of the age group that we oversee. But they're definitely the lens that we look through. And similar to Dave, we select on its individual merit. So it's irrelevant of where you train, whether you've been on activity before. We look at each activity on its own, and we will do selection for each activity separately with our team. So it's multiple eyes, multiple times.
I've just got this vision of X Factor and how they have everybody's photograph on the table in front of them, and you guys sort of turning them over and saying, no, that's a no from me. I mean, is that sort of what we're looking at here?
No, you know what? It's we have really good discussions. Like Andy said at the start, what you've got by having a diverse team is you have a lot of check and challenge, and that's what we ask of each other. We make sure that it's never one single person's opinion. We make sure that the team have eyes on them, and yes, the national coach might be the one saying, look, this is what I'm proposing. But the reason we have criteria and processes is to check and challenge that. Is that right? Is there anyone we're missing? Have you thought about that? So there are genuine discussions that come into these selections. So yeah, it's not quite as grand as an X Factor, but we definitely get into some healthy discussions, that's for sure.
No, that sounds fascinating, and I suppose we should now address the elephant in the room, which is the rating and ranking system. Now, some parents talk about a rat race to try and get ranking points, or to improve whatever rating system is in place at the time. And the current system does appear from the outside looking in to parents to reward those who focus on collecting ranking points by doing all sorts of creative things like traveling to weaker tournaments or competing in many, many more events. Some even think this is what motivates a lot of the cheating that goes on at junior levels and the parental stresses. What are your thoughts about that?
You want me to take that one, Hels? Yeah, I mean, to reassure you guys, that's definitely not the case. So as Hels mentioned, does competitive profile come into it as you get older? 100%. And there are kind of this talent that shouts and talent that whispers. And sometimes the talent that shouts happen to be the ones that are maybe winning and doing particularly well, but also has the game development to back it up. So sometimes they're the easy ones to spot. The talent that whispers are the ones that necessarily aren't winning right now. So sometimes it can look like that because you may have players that have the attributes and what we need, or what they're looking to, what they need in place for the next stage, and they happen to be winning. But I can guarantee you we're not sat looking at numbers 1 to 8 and they're the selection for this particular event. We of course consider competitive profile, but national ranking, it's not the driver. We're not sat looking at ranking lists. We're looking at kind of depth charts of players and the complete picture.
Okay, so on that subject then, we know that some players withdraw from consolation events to avoid having a loss, or because there are not enough ranking points and they don't need them. And although World Tennis Number isn't used for tournament entry for junior players, certainly playing order in county teams is, which leads on to ranking points. And inaccurate measures can impact players' points further. So, if you've got to be in it to win it, if you like. And I mean, even as I'm saying this, I'm feeling that energy behind this rat race to get these points, and I remember it well. And it can also encourage players to be playing up at higher age groups, which undermines the lower level tournament for the older juniors who are perhaps just starting. So you've got a sort of 14-year-old that's just starting at their tournament experience at a grade 5, bumping into an under 12 who's there for the points. And just one final comment on that as well. Are you still using UTR as a measure and not World Tennis Number?
Yeah, do you want me to start on that, and then I'll kind of come to you, Andy, and then Dave? So with the UTR, probably as a starting point, we use UTR for some of our metrics, because at the moment, it is the most accurate way of accurate indicator, and it's the one that's least open to manipulation, and that's what we actually like about it. You can go and chase points all you like, try and go into the weaker tournaments, but actually your UTR will actually be a reflection of your playing level. So we do use that a little bit more internally, but as I say, what we don't do is with results and ranking, which is where I find it actually fascinating, where parents feel like there's this race to the kind of finish line, so to speak, because certainly from our perspective, that really isn't a factor that's considered. We consider competitive profile as much as we are considering all those other elements I've just talked about. And certainly in my experience, I've been in tennis an awfully long time now, I've seen players that have had an incredibly high competitive profile, but not taking care of their game development, and they've not been able to progress through the pathway. I've also seen the opposite, where you've had players that have been competing to an okay level. I think you have to compete to a level, but they've been competing to an okay level, but they've been really taking care of their game development, and you start to see them flourish and push through as they start to move through the age groups, particularly when growth and maturation hits in. So certainly our messaging is really strong in that, look, there is a competitive element. We're talking about tennis here. So we are looking for performer qualities as well. So sometimes when we're talking about competitive, we're not necessarily looking at the results and the ranking, but we might be looking at, actually, are they fighting for every point? Are they responding really well to the challenges? The performer qualities of a competitor are very important ones, which I do think you can start to see from a young age, but they are slightly different actually to the outcome and the results. So I do find it quite fascinating that it feels like this race to a finish line, because certainly from our perspective, when we're looking at invitations and selections, that really isn't a factor that we are considering, certainly not outweighing all the other areas we just talked about. But I guess Dave and Andy, it might be good just to come in talking around the RPDCs here, and maybe that county piece, Dave, that Kay was talking about.
Yeah, and just to kind of follow on from Helen's point is, we like UTR because right now it's the most accurate measure. We are continually talking with the ITF about developing the world tennis number and how they can increase the accuracy of that by their own admission. So we're constantly talking to them. But as we sit here right now in our world, UTR is the most reflective for all the reasons Helen said. It's the least open to manipulation. Is if somebody travels to a weaker 16 and under grade 4 to win points, that doesn't appear. That won't get impacted. That's why we like it. And just as a practical example of where that fits, on the RPDC long list system, for example, there's a UTR ranking in order to try and achieve one metric towards selection, but you still need to get a nomination from a national coach. So a national coach who's experienced using the metrics Helen outlined earlier, kind of head, heart, athletic, still has to award a second nomination for people to be selected. So it's not possible to kind of win your way into selection. You have to still have the game development. And Helen's right. We can think of examples of players that may well have been very competitive and maybe some of the best in the country. And some of these players do not get selected or invited to some of our activity because they're not taking care of their game development and they're not improving.
Dave, did you want to add something to that?
Well, did you want me to? I know you mentioned about the county training selections or county cup selections. Did you want me to just do a little bit on that?
Yes, I think so, because I mean there has been an undercurrent from parents. I mean, the LTA often say that world tennis number perhaps not being 100% accurate isn't a problem because it's not relevant to junior players, but it's definitely relevant to the juniors who are playing in open tournaments. It's definitely relevant to those playing any kind of team tennis where they're being ordered based on world tennis number. So there are lots of anecdotal evidence that counties know. Everybody knows who the best player is, but somehow they're not the best player and they can't play at number one. And then obviously as well for selection in the first place into county teams. So yeah, if there's anything, but I think parents would be quite happy if we switched over to UTR until perhaps world tennis number was more robust, but maybe that's too complicated to do.
Well, I guess the thing I'd probably come at from this perspective is from a county's perspective, I see it as twofold. You've got county training and you've got county cup. And I guess messaging from from ours would be for county training, for inclusion in county training, that should, in my view, certainly, that should always be about which of the players you think are showing that promise and potential. The competitive part wouldn't be as high up on the list. County Cup's different though. I do think when you're selecting County Cup teams, as long as counties have a clear and transparent policy by which they look to select kids to represent the team, it's ultimately on them to decide that though. I think that's certainly one of the things I found out when joining the LTA some 15 years ago, not realizing that the county associations and the LTA weren't all one and the same, and actually the county associations are their own identity in themselves, and that they can whilst there is a link between the two and there's certainly some funding agreements, they get to manage themselves to a certain extent. But I think that's an important distinction between those two programs. One I certainly see as being more appropriate, being linked to competition and outcome, and then county training less so.
Okay, that's really interesting. I've got a couple of questions in the chat, and guys, even if I don't mention your question now, I'm sure that we'll come to all of these. There's a lot of topics here that we're covering anyway. So we've talked about how much world tennis number is used for selections. That one's been covered. What about someone here has asked about older children? So this is something we've talked about before, that the LTA talk about tennis as being an early adoption sport, but a late specialization sport. So you want us to get playing the sport and get that technical skill in early, but not necessarily committing your life to tennis at too young an age, and not having some kind of blended approach to sport enjoyment. What is there for children who start playing tennis at a much later age, say 14 or 15? And I mean, we hear of the pros like Sinner and so forth who've come into the sport at a later age, and perhaps there's a bit more to the story than just saying they've picked up a tennis racket at that age. But what is there within the pathway? How do you cope with children who suddenly appear in the sport much later?
You want me to go on that one? I mean, I think we are talking about quite a few anomalies here. So the chances of players coming through at 14, 15, 16, kind of unbeknown to kind of us, are very few and far between. I think we have a really good now. We keep an eye on probably more players than we have ever done. So I think we are talking about kind of anomalies here, kind of in the system. I do agree that tennis is a relatively early kind of adoption sport. But I also think one of the things we've been talking a lot about in the team is the value of also continuing with multiple sports, particularly at that younger age group. And what you might find interesting, you might not, is often people refer to tennis and strength and conditioning, S&C. We actually are deliberately trying to change that word S&C, and we're trying to refer to it as athletic development, because part of your athletic development could be playing in other sports. That's part of your athletic development program. So I do think, yes, it is an early kind of adoption sport. It's very, very hard if you pick up the racket for the first time, kind of 12 plus. It is going to be hard. Does that mean to say it's impossible and no one could? No, I don't think you can say that about anything, but we know the chances, and if you look at the research, which suggests that is highly unlikely. But what we are trying to do is we're trying to encourage dual career pathways. So we're very much around trying to make sure they keep their education going alongside their tennis. We're trying to encourage that athletic development, so making sure there are multiple other ways, including other sports, of being able to kind of improve kind of in that aspect. So we're trying to have kind of a much more of a holistic approach here, because we understand it's a long journey, and a big part of the journey is almost, for want of a better word, stickability. It's the ability to kind of stick with it for a prolonged period of time, making sure that you're moving forward all the time. But, you know, it is a long journey there. So I think that what we're trying to do more so than ever is, we're trying to highlight the fact it is an early specialisation sport, but we're also trying to make sure that people aren't putting all their eggs in one basket, and they're not trying to race to that finish line. Like I said before, everyone has their own journey, and that journey can sometimes be at different paces. You know, for males, that's probably slightly different to females. Also, it massively will depend upon growth and maturation. At what point you hit peak height velocity? What's your training program like? What's your access to a good competition schedule? There are so many factors that make it an individual journey. So I suppose what we're trying to encourage is, look, yes, we know there are certain things that need to be in place to try and help the player optimize their development, but I think we're trying to have much more of a holistic long-term view. I think you'll probably see that by lots of players now looking at NCAA as a really viable option, and the men's team actually in particular, that's part of kind of the men's team strategy. You know, there'll be many boys that actually by that point would really benefit from going out to an NCAA, getting a good program for 3 to 4 years, coming out at the end of it, then they might decide that they want to try and play full time. So
could you just explain what you're meaning by NCAA for anyone who's not familiar, because we've got quite a lot of parents of young children here.
Cool. So it's basically the American collegiate system. So NCAA, and you have different divisions of colleges there. So you have your Division 1s, which would be your top tier colleges. You have your Division 2s, which are the next tier down. But what they have is a big scholarship scheme. So, you know, they're big into their sport there. Some of the tennis programs have very, very good tennis programs, and they can play almost as part of their college, and they play against all the other colleges in kind of the NCAA team, as well as individual events. And what we've certainly seen over the latter probably 5 to 10 years is more players actually using that as an option, because they're not quite ready at 18 maybe to go full time at that point, but it gives them a brilliant opportunity to keep their education going, keep maturing physically, emotionally, in a really good program that's going to continue to drive their game forward. So we're definitely seeing that as a growing trend as well, which is one that we support. You know, it's an individual. You've got to do the right thing for the right individual. And I think that's probably something, again, which we are doing better now than we ever have. It's not saying there is one route for all. It's about trying to make sure we have the right route for the right individual. But I don't know, Andy, Davis, anything you want to add?
Yeah, it's a really good point, Kay. And sometimes when people talk about people coming later to the sport or later developers, it's kind of thrown at us like a negative. And I would actually see it as a positive. If that were to happen, and like Helen says, they are the anomalies, we would welcome that. And by moving to kind of individualized selection points, that creates more of that opportunity to happen. One point I did want to make is our competition calendar is probably the best it's been for a long, long time. It comes with its challenges. So there is some devil in the detail. But if you come into the sport, there is a grading structure that starts at kind of local level, county, regional, national, and international. And we have more kind of national, international competition and bigger draw sizes. So we're always pushing to keep these draws as big as we possibly can within reason and resource. So I can remember a time where the draws might have been 8 players in a national tournament. You've now got 32 draws, and often sometimes qualifying for Tennis Europe events. That actually means more people can get access to that kind of that experience, that environment, and it's possible to progress through the competition pathway. So actually, in some ways, there's a kind of that competition pathway is there just to help those players that maybe come to the sport later. And what's great is you can play in Britain all the way up until the very highest level of 18 and under tournament. So we're really proud of that. I'm not going to pretend it's perfect, because when you create a grading structure, you have to create a ranking system, and the ranking system is like having 3 holes and 2 hands to try and you think you fix the problem and you spring a leak. But actually, the competition program is as inclusive and as opportunistic as I think it's ever been.
No, that's great, because I mean, I think some parents have said that, you know, the system from their perspective seems to reward those children who haven't kept a healthy balance and then favours those who overdo the red and orange stages, you know, with sort of people reporting some kids playing, say, 80 matches at that stage, whereas others playing 300. And you know, I don't know whether that's what's led that child to perhaps develop and become relevant, or whether that's, and it kind of leads me on to my next question, which is to do with, in the world of tennis opened up, which the LTA are very keen to sort of make happen. And we've seen the announcement of the new 3-year plan coming out now, having had the original 5-year plan, I think it was, wasn't it? That Tennis Opened Up is very central to that, to make sure that everybody gets a fair chance. And parents have been asking about lots of barriers to their ability to help. So, for example, if you haven't actually played tennis yourself, if you're a little bit nervous of expressing your opinions, if you perhaps don't have a sort of extrovert nature or a confidence that your child won't be disadvantaged, and then of course the wealth of the parents, and sometimes it isn't just necessarily cash, it's also time wealth, where parents can't perhaps give time to their children or take them to camps that are held during school time. How can we as a tennis community make sure that we're really seeing the talent come through regardless of those factors?
For me to start that one, I mean, I think there's quite a few questions you've probably put in one there. I think the affordability question is a really good one, and it's one that we literally talk about almost on a daily basis. How can we reduce the barriers? And it's actually one of our priority focuses actually for 2024, looking into how can we kind of ensure it's as inclusive and diverse the entry routes into performance tennis as possible. But we do understand there are some barriers that do exist. I mean, there is a number of things that we're almost looking to do short term, and there's also some things that we need to consider a little bit more of the medium and long term, how we can plan some of this in sustainably. But, you know, one of the reasons we invest in programs and not individuals is, you know, previously, if you went to regimes gone by, there would be funding that goes to individuals. We don't believe that is the best way of doing it. And what we now do is we fund into programs. So the RPDC is a good example. So that means they can subsidize the cost of many players' programs. The money is not just going into one person's hands. So we're trying to create more quality environments that bigger numbers can access. So that is definitely a key part of our plan. And, you know, with the tennis and performance programs, we're constantly trying to quality assure those programs. And ideally, we want to grow the numbers of these programs so there are more accessible programs locally for players. I think that the other element is just from a competition perspective. Andy's talked about there already. I may be preaching to converted here, but we've doubled our competition calendar over the last kind of 2 to 3 years. And one of the reasons we're investing so heavily into it is to try and provide more opportunities where you can start your journey in tennis, including your international journey in this country, because we know that's far cheaper to go to a Tennis Europe event or an ITF event in this country than it is necessarily flying to travel abroad. So again, that's another key part of our strategy. But it is, as I say, I think the affordability, the how can we get tennis into lower socioeconomic groups, that is definitely something that's a really big focus for us. Also the regional variance, making sure that it's not becoming London and South East centric, that we can make sure that irrelevant of where you live in England, Wales or Scotland. So I'm not going to sit here and say we've got it perfect, because we haven't. It is one of our biggest ongoing challenges. But what I can guarantee is it's something that is very much at the fore of our mind. In fact, there's a kind of a travel subsidy that we're actually about to announce in about a week's time, which, okay, is not going to save people thousands, but it hopefully will save people money and petrol when they're coming to our activity. So we're always looking at ways that we can try and make it as accessible as possible.
I get that, and you know, it's great to hear that that's the ambition. You know, I mean, I always sort of think, well, if you want to take up show jumping, you kind of need a horse, don't you? And you know, you can't escape these things with some sports, but it's just sort of hard, isn't it, for parents who perhaps don't live in close to an RPDC or are just sort of disadvantaged in other ways, seeing talent go into other sports because it's just a cheaper thing for their child to do.
Yeah.
A lot of questions. Sorry, Helen, did you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, I think the other bit just on that is it's a good point you've made. From a coach development point of view, we're now actually in a performance team, have a kind of performance coach development team. And that's a big focus. And how can we get more coaches of the right level around the country? Because like you said, you know, ideally we want good programs which are accessible, but we also want more coaches because that's only going to help that as well. So if there's not a program that's close to you, might there be a really good coach that can still create that good environment, has got the skills and knowledge they need. So actually that coach development drive is another big area for us.
And are you able to take more players in an area if you randomly have better talent there and less players in another area? Does that happen, or is it sort of a set number from each region?
No quotas. And I think that's a bit of a myth, actually. It's a good one to kind of dispel is, no, we don't have quotas. You know, it will be purely for whatever activity or whatever selection point it is we're talking about, there will be a level, you know, and we will be looking at that. So let's use a live example. I'm going to come to you, Andy, in a minute. RPDC long list, because we know this comes up a lot. There's not a set number that we need to get to or stop when we get to it. There'll be looking at kind of the criteria we've talked about. Who are the players that actually meet that criteria? Hopefully over time, our aim is we can support more players. We get more players that are coming through. But certainly there's no quota kind of cut-off. And if there's more in one area or less in the other. And what we're actually trying to do is work really closely with the counties. It's a big part of Dave's job with his team. So where there are counties which may have kind of less players, we're actually trying to, well, we're developing an agreed action plan with those counties now to go, look, actually, in your county, what's your bespoke action plan for how we can move towards that? Because what we realise with counties is one size doesn't fit all. They're all different. So actually what we're doing this year is every single county across the country will have an agreed and bespoke action plan. But that might look very different in one county to another without naming counties, but you can all kind of picture the differences potentially. So that's again, it's going to be a big part of Dave's year this year with his team, really working on the counties with that.
Okay, Dave, did you want to say anything about that?
What about, sorry, about that specific one? What point, Kay? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, about the differences between counties and the plan to sort of try and level up a bit more.
Yeah, okay. So, well, I guess the project going on with counties at the moment is trying to support them by give them more of an objective understanding of what does the health of 10 and under look like within each of the counties. And that's across a number of different areas and a number of different metrics, but competition is ultimately at the heart of it. You know, it's almost that competitive culture is like that conduit, isn't it, between participation and performance. And the more kids you can get competing at different levels of frequency throughout the year, they're more likely to be the players that go on that that performance journey. So it's giving counties the autonomy to look at where they're at as a whole and think, you know, this is the state of 10 and under tennis within the county, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And how do we want to focus our resources to try and make some improvements? It's not going to be earth-shattering improvements in 1 year, but it's having a clear focus where they can throw their resources at to make some improvements to the general health of 10 and under tennis.
It's interesting on the group recently, I won't name and shame, but there's one county that have cancelled their county camps, county coaching. I guess they'll still put forward teams. My understanding was under the new LTA funding structure, that was a required thing for them to provide. Is that your understanding as well?
No, it's fact. Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's that is exactly what it's supposed to be. You know, some of the funding there is for the delivery of a county training program. So I guess in any scenario, which would be surprising to me if that were happening, that would be not fulfilling one of the obligations of that core funding. So
okay, good. Well, I'll pick that one offline and pick that one up offline and see what we can get to find out about that, because it has definitely happened in one county.
okay.
We're getting sort of a bit short on time, and I know people are keen to come in and ask their own questions. I feel like I've been hogging the floor, but the questions I've got here are the ones that have been put forward in advance, and so I'm doing the people a service who've put them in advance. But we do have some on the chat, and some of them are quite quick, I think. So first of all, do Tennis Scotland or Tennis Wales have any say in the GB and national camp and match play selections? My understanding is that they do not have a seat at this table.
If we're talking about, well, I can talk about 10 and under, that they certainly have a seat at the table in which they can represent or put forward players that they think should be in contention. But ultimately the national coaches will make a decision. But one of the national coaches is very much tasked with representing the Scottish players through liaising with the colleagues that we have in Tennis Scotland. In the same way, one of the national coaches connected into North Wales, and one of the national coaches is connected into South Wales. So I think there's fair representation of which players could be nominated for a different type and invited to different activity. Has that always been a perfect process? No, absolutely not. And have we refined that this year? And it was not so long ago we formalised that process for Scotland. In Wales, I would say that's there's been a stronger way of working over recent time. But yeah, at the start of the year, we spoke with those in Tennis Scotland to go, how can we make this a little bit more seamless so that the players are being fully represented for any of the activity that we're inviting for.
Okay, great. That does sound like progress is being made there. And how could how does the player actually get a nomination from a national coach? How does that happen?
Yeah, so that happens in 11 to 14. That primarily happens through competition, but it can be observed anywhere. So a player can be observed by a national coach in any environment. So that could be in a training environment, but it's more likely to be in a competitive environment. And you'll often see our national coaches kind of around and about regularly at competition. And like Helen mentioned earlier, the way we try and organise ourselves is multiple eyes, multiple times, which actually is a scheduling headache, because you have to make sure you've got enough national coaches to see enough of a bigger pool of a player base over a year. So primarily in the older age groups, it's focused around competition, but not exclusively. There is the ability for somebody to come onto our radar or be put forward that we can identify, and then the coach would apply the framework that Helen outlined earlier and see if they meet the criteria to be nominated.
Okay, thanks, Andy, for that. And then another question. Some of the parents are messaging me directly because they don't want to be named. So I'm just reading from the script here. Just pointing out, says one parent, that for 9 and under and 10 and under, points are important because they give you access to higher grade tournament. And if national coaches don't see you at a grade 1 or 2, it's more difficult to get any visibility. So if you're a player from the countryside that no one knows, and without a coach vouching for you, there's no way to get a wild card into the grade 2s and grade 1s.
I mean, I'd say it's really comprehensive what we do, if I'm honest. Because, and I say that because there's a regional performance camp program which has visibility of 500 or so children. That's linked to lead county performance coaches, which have got their finger on the pulse in the counties around which of the players connected with clubs. We have a team that are obviously at the grade 1s and grade 2s, but that doesn't mean that they're also not at grade 3s and 4s. They just manage that more locally. But we're also at, two of the things that go into the calendar, almost first and foremost, along with the grade 1s, grade 2s, and the activity that we deliver, are the county cup events at 8s and 9s. because I think that's a really great way of seeing all of the young players that are showing promise across all of the counties. Now, listen, if you're still listening to me say that and you're saying, oh yeah, but we're not quite in some of those activities as yet, there's also no reason why you can't pick up the phone and speak to a lead county coach and say, look, we think we're doing well, we're a bit out on the sticks. Is there a way to get an opportunity to come into county training, and just almost forge your path yourself a little bit? If you don't feel like it's happening for you, we'd encourage that. Like if there are players that we're ever out there and we feel that we're not seeing and we should be, you know, we'd be more than open to, and I think counties would be as well, about understanding who those players are and where they're at.
That's interesting. So your door's open to that, and either via the county initially, perhaps, and if you don't feel you're getting your child's being noticed and they have talent, there is an opportunity. Another person's asking on the chat how wildcards are distributed for national events. Is that something your team are responsible for?
Yeah, so for obviously the age groups that we work within, so 10s and 9s, national level events, we have a really strong linking system already. So the regional events, certainly in the winter, you know, if you win a winter regional tour, or you gain a wild card, so to speak, into the grade 2. So I'd say that culture of winning your own opportunities and not being dependent on a wild card being given by a national coach, we try not to, if I'm honest, because there's so many up for grabs. We almost prefer that to happen that way. And I would say it's really, really, really rare that we would give a wild card into a national event, because the players, to a certain extent, they pick themselves based on their own competitive performances.
Okay, that's really interesting to know as well. I'm going to rattle through some more questions off the chat, so I want parents to feel like they definitely have a say in what's asked. You know, we've got lists of questions everywhere and we could go on all night, but I appreciate you guys probably do have other things to be doing. How frequently would you recommend the younger ages do tournaments? So for someone whose child's just turned 7.
Am I going to get shot if I said it depends again? I probably am, aren't I? Look, I've got a 7-year-old boy myself. He doesn't play tennis. His love right now is Erling Haaland and Man City, and that's tough to say as a Man United fan. But he plays for a football team, but he competes every week, and he's not an exceptional footballer. He's doing okay, but he competes every single week as part of his football program. He trains on a Wednesday and he plays some matches on a Saturday morning. The reason I say it depends is because that for some people might be really difficult to facilitate, getting relevant competition at a decent cost. So it doesn't matter if they're not doing it every week. If I had to put a finger in the air and say, if you were playing competitively every 3 weeks, I think that would be a good start. But also I think sometimes it's okay to think creatively. And if you even can't manage that, it's like, okay, so how could you facilitate playing something competitive, but it might not be an external tournament. It might be just like, you know, someone else at the club or a boy or a girl of an older age group, and you just want to arrange something amongst themselves. It's remembering that competition is a tool to develop. That's ultimately all it is. Now, if you're doing that in an external competition or at your club playing against a boy or a girl a year older, then so be it. It's no problem. And try and encourage that process of go out there and try and put your skills onto the match court and see how you get on. Bit of a long answer.
No, I get that completely. And, you know, really, when you think about what we're trying to introduce children to through competition, so, for example, making decisions under pressure, or just having the resilience to keep fighting when they're perhaps not ahead in the game, then those things can be learnt even in squads to some extent, can't they? If you're really struggling for competition, I mean, obviously competition is perfectly 100%. Set up for that.
Sometimes it's okay for it to be a bit clunky. You know, it doesn't have to always be perfectly structured, well organized. It's like sometimes development is in the messiness of it sometimes, even at a younger age group.
Yes, absolutely. I've got a question. Both my sons are in county team, that's under 8 and under 9, but we're not in a particularly strong county. How can I make sure that my kids' talent's maximised in the long run? And how do I know what that looks like?
I mean, I always come back to the real bare bones, like real basics. Like, do I feel as though, and I try and put myself in the same situation. I've got 3 children, 4, 7, 10. And if my 7-year-old was playing tennis or even a different sport, I don't understand the context. I'd be trying to understand, I'd be doing a bit of research. Do I feel as though they're in an environment on a day-to-day basis that's going to help them? You know, we spoke about the RPDCs for a certain age group. We spoke about the 10 and under performance programs. Those are programs that are endorsed by the LTA based on a track record of developing young talent. That for me would be a starting point. I'd be really curious and interested about that, because I would want to feel comfortable that they're with a coach in an environment that's potentially done it a bit before. That would be my starting point. And I think those 2 kite marks that the LTA endorsed, that they're there for a reason. They're obviously there to try and, certainly 11 to 14s, to minimize the blockages of accessing the type of program that's going to help a player continue to develop. But at 10 and under, it's very much, there's a track record around those programs, which that doesn't mean that if you're not at a 10 and under performance program, that they also couldn't have a track record. But those would be the things I would be curious about as a parent.
Okay, we had one person who signed up in advance and actually was happy to ask their own question, but I can't actually see them on the screen. So if you recognise this question, please feel free to come off mute and join in with it. But the question was, how can those living in a more rural area, but who are still number 1 in their county, access the pathway, or indeed the RPDC centres?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So probably repeating myself in terms of how can you access the pathway? Well, that's independent of where you train. So if you're demonstrating the improvements, the head, heart athlete, then you can be selected for any part of our activity, whether that's camps, trips, that's irrelevant of where you train. And in terms of accessing RPDCs, it's a very live challenge, as Helen said. We believe in environments. So we have pretty good geographical coverage, but it's not complete geographical coverage. That's a reality. There are parts of the country that are unrealistic drive times. And we are constantly challenging ourselves to say, what are the solutions around that? One of the solutions right now is there are some RPDCs that offer residential options. Now, and that's not something we prescribe lightly, and it's not something I would recommend anybody looks at lightly, because actually sending your child to a school-based tennis environment is something you should really consider and do your research for. But I guess I can't answer the question immediately, but what you can do is you can also access a regional player development centre. So if you couldn't get there 5 days a week, but actually the drive time meant you could get there twice a week, and you could go and access their squads or their S&C and have the RPDC head coach connect with your coach on a more local basis, that's also possible. But we also acknowledge there are parts of the country that it's really difficult. And as Helen mentioned earlier, it's part of our medium to long-term strategy to look at a solution. But what we do know is you need all the parts of the environment. So what we wouldn't do, for example, is to satisfy a geographical hole is put something which is suboptimal, which actually wouldn't allow people to develop, because I think that would be, as Dave mentioned, we've got confidence in the kite mark. We wouldn't want to dumb down the expectations or minimize them because it suits a geographical need. Actually, what we want to do is do this right and actually make sure those environments are there.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I was very familiar with people accessing when my children were at Team Bath. Some were coming in, and we always used to feel so privileged. We call it the postcode privilege, really, to be able to be in and out of school in 6 minutes and onto the tennis court and back again. It does give you that amazing opportunity to really be playing tennis regularly, and other children coming driving from all over gives you the playing standard you need to improve. So it is something, we'd all love to see more indoor centres, and we'd all love to see more performance. And I guess these things often come down to just getting more kids playing tennis. If we could get the population playing more, then we get everything in tennis works better then, doesn't it? I'm just conscious we've got a few more questions in the chat that we may or may not have answered. Somebody's asking specifically about wildcards for under 14 events. Dave, yeah. Did you think... Oh, sorry, Andy, that's you.
Yeah, not dissimilar to how Dave mentioned. There's a little bit more complication because it comes down to who owns and runs the tournament. So there are certain tournaments that take on the running, so the venue themselves take on the running, and we will share the wild cards with that event. So the host venue would have access to some wild cards, and so would the LTA. But our philosophy is actually the same as Dave's. Is we like this philosophy of earned progression. So actually demonstrating by maybe winning your age group to get an opportunity in either a higher grade in your own age group or an older age group to kind of recognize earned progression. So we don't become a nation that kind of demands wildcards or becomes entitled around wildcards. Where we can, we look to kind of make sure they're earned. Now, sometimes there are scheduling issues, and maybe some of the best competitors who are at the level may have a scheduling issue. So for example, they may be representing Great Britain in a team event, which means they can't play a certain tournament, so the players require a wild card to get into another tournament. But yeah, we share for certain events and other events that we have control of them.
Thank you. That's great. And then this question about selecting regional players. Somebody's asking if that's only from grade 2, grade 1 tournaments. We've sort of covered that. It's perhaps a misunderstanding as to how that process works again about this selection for regional.
Do you want to cover regional camps, Dave, and then I'll then cover long list?
What was the question? Sorry, I'm trying to read the chat. I can't see. Was
Yes,
this one
really
straight to you, Kay? Sorry.
Yeah, really about sort of selection for regional activities.
Yeah.
Just to reiterate how that process works.
Yes, so the regional performance camp program as a whole is delivered. It's led by the national coach, but it's very much in collaboration with counties. So we lean on them for their nominations as to which of the players that they feel, and I'm talking about the lead county performance. So each county has a lead county performance coach, and their responsibility is to nominate players that they feel are relevant for that activity. Now, that isn't the only mechanism by which a player might get an invite. It might be because the national coach has seen a player at competition themselves that they weren't already aware of, or they've been at a program and another head coach of a program raises awareness of a player. So there's multiple ways, but on paper, it would be counties working in conjunction with the national coach to formulate the players that are relevant for that activity. That helps. Okay,
thank you. Did you have anything to add to that, Andy?
Yeah, just in case the question was more around regional player development centres, because that question often comes up a lot. That's more of a national selection. So there's 2 stages to being selected into a regional player development centre. There's what we call the long list stage, which is the national coach nomination process that we mentioned earlier. So it through to kind of mid-April, the national coaches are observing players, and if a player receives a minimum of 2 nominations, that could be 2 nominations, or it could be 1 competitive metric and a nomination, they will appear on what we call the long list. And that's almost a NGB endorsement that we think the player has potential. And obviously, the younger they are, that group is slightly bigger. And as you get more towards 14, that group becomes smaller because actually the standard and the bar gets higher. So this creates a long list. From that long list, you're then invited, if you want to apply to a regional player development centre. And each regional player development centre has their own selection process. They have their own philosophy. They have their own player development philosophy, and they will run a process and they will evaluate you. And you could get offered a full-time program. You could be offered an access program. You may not be offered a place this time, or you might choose not to go. But actually what we do is we create a long list and then say, look, you've achieved the kind of first benchmark, now go and speak to a regional player development centre, because we think it's really important that the regional player development centre has an involvement in the players they select, because the environment needs to be right for the player. So it's a kind of 2-way process. You go and visit a regional player development centre, you're analysing if this environment is good for your child. Is it the right environment at the right time? And the coaches are also evaluating if it's going to be a good fit for them. So is the player at the right stage? Have they got the right attributes? So it's kind of a 2-stage process to get into a regional player development centre.
Okay, great. Well, guys, I'm really conscious of time. I really do want you to, as everybody on here, thank you for all your questions in the chat. Thank you for all the questions that you submitted in advance. I think what we'll probably have to do on another occasion is get back together and open the floor to the parents to actually comment if they want to. We had a lot of a general overview content to cover this time, but I think it's probably sensible if we draw to a close now and say thank you to Helen and Andy and Dave. Really appreciate your time, guys. I don't know whether there's anything else you guys want to say before we say goodbye for the evening.
No, I was just going to say really appreciate having us. I hope it's been useful. I imagine the journey as a tennis parent, because I'm not one. I've got one dancer and I've got two footballers, and I'm navigating pathways in a sport that I'm not overly familiar with, and it's not easy. So I hope in some ways the contribution from Helen and myself has helped. And like you say, if there's a willingness to re-engage later on down the line, we'd be more than happy to do so.
Well, one of the purposes of the tennis parents community is to get people together and help them to help each other, because we've got parents who've got great experience, such as Johnny O'Mara's dad, and then right down to people who've never played tennis themselves and their child's showing talent. So hopefully we're filling a bit of that gap as well. But Andy and Helen, anything else to say?
No, just from me, a big thank you to everyone. And hopefully also what you've got from today is we're actually quite an approachable bunch. So if you see any of the national pathway coaches or the national coaches, or, come and speak to us. We understand that, the journey is not a straightforward one sometimes. So we are here to support and help and educate. So, if you do see us at any events or you see any of our team, please feel free to go up to them and speak to them and ask some questions. That's what we're there for.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and just to echo the same thing, guys, is we're really approachable. Please feel free to reach out. And like Dave, I've got a little one now, so I've got to start putting my money where my mouth is with all this advice to parents over the years. But I'm watching my little one kind of whack balloons around and considering what comes next. So yeah, please feel free to reach out at any time for support.
Fabulous. Well, once again, guys, really appreciate your time. It's been great talking to you. I know everybody's putting things in the chat now saying thank you for what they've had to listen to tonight. And there'll be lots more people who listen to this offline as well. And we'll keep those communication lines going, hopefully with you all, and keep supporting the parents as best as we can.
Thanks, Kay. Thanks, everyone.
Many thanks, everybody, and good night.
Thanks.